What's the best martial art for self-defense? Depending on who you are, you might say something like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, or maybe krav maga. You might even say Jeet Kune Do or even Kempo. These are all frequently called the best martial arts, but none of them are the best martial art, because here's the cold hard truth. There is no best martial art for self-defense. Now, I'm sure you were expecting some kind of rank list, maybe me saying something like, this is the worst martial art for self-defense versus the best martial art. But that's a really unfair way to categorize things, I think, and I'll explain why in a little bit. But first, I want to establish this. Martial arts and fighting as a whole are not self-defense. Self-defense is a wide world of situations a person could find themselves in that, yes, may involve hand-to-hand fighting with another human being, or they might not. So with that in mind, we're going to be taking a look at these three categories of martial arts and talk about what they bring to the self-defense table. Let's start by talking about the grappling styles. Brazilian jiu-jitsu, sambo, wrestling, judo, whatever. Grabbing another person, putting them on the floor, restraining or choking them. Let's cut right to the chase here. Grappling is probably the single best thing you can learn when it comes to non-consensual violence in the modern day with legal considerations. That's a lot of caveats, but it's something you actually have to consider. I'm sure we've all talked to the kung fu dork who says, if he comes up to me, I'll just BUG the eyes, rip out his throat, push him to the ground, stomp his head. Okay, sure you will. But what happens immediately after that? Also, who are you doing this to? Because yes, I guess there's always the chance that someone can jump out of the shadows and attack you, but it's more likely that you're going to get in a fight with someone you know, and probably someone you care about. What if instead of using the 5-point palm hard exploding technique, I used my judo to take someone to the ground, wrap their arms around their chest, and hold them there until they calm down? Now you're able to do two things. One, you're able to stop the person that wants to hurt you from hurting you. And two, you're doing it in a way that leaves you legally clean. But that being said, there are still some major drawbacks to grappling. For one, as I'm sure there's people furiously typing away in the comments, it's not very useful for multiple attackers. I actually hate this line of thinking because there's no martial art that's good for multiple attackers. If there was, everybody would study it. It's not like boxing teaches you how to fight off 3 people at the same time. You can only throw a jab at one person. That being said, it is still a real consideration. While you might have someone in successful side control and have them completely pinned to the ground, their friend could be sneaking up behind you and kick you right in the head. I've also heard that grappling is a bad choice when weapons get involved, but I very much disagree with that. I think if a weapon makes an appearance, you have no choice but to put your hands on that weapon. And what do you call it when you're fighting with someone for control of their knife? You're wrestling over that knife. See what I'm saying here? But with that in mind, let's start talking about striking, because there's some value in that I think grappling doesn't hold a candle to. Striking is overall less useful than grappling in a self-defense situation, but it's also more intuitive. Whether we're talking about a baby or a fully grown adult, when a person gets mad, they want to ball up their fist and try to hit you with it, which means learning how to block, slip, and overall defend from punches is one of the best things you can do for self-defense. At the same time, punching someone in the face is a great way to deter them from wanting to hurt you. If you hit the right spot with enough force, their nose might break. Or if you take your shin and slam it into someone's quad, that might make them think twice about wanting to hurt you. But here's the issue. All of those scenarios I just laid out rely on the person deciding they don't want to do this anymore. In other words, striking is just fast pain compliance. Let's go back to grappling for a second. In this video right here, we talk about why the straight arm lock and the wrist lock accompanying it is not a great self-defense move. But why? It's because ultimately, locking someone's arm out like this does hurt, but it doesn't actually disrupt any of the function from them. What you're hoping to do is create pain compliance. Punching someone in the face, if you don't knock them out, is basically the same thing. Pain compliance can be very effective, especially because most people have never been punched in the face or kicked in the leg, so they don't necessarily know how to handle it, but I don't like gambling when it comes to my safety. At the same time, striking does offer something grappling doesn't do inherently. Striking allows you to maintain distance. If you're trying to get distance away from somebody, a side kick or a roundhouse kick is a great way to keep them away from you while you make your escape. So if you're trying to follow the sage advice of just run away, well, striking is a good skill to have in your back pocket. Earlier I said everyone inherently understands striking, but I should probably amend that to say everyone respects striking. People don't necessarily understand that just because you cut someone open above the eyebrow doesn't mean you seriously harm them. But that argument doesn't necessarily hold up in front of a judge. So while I love striking, and I think all of them are the most fun, dynamic martial arts in the entire world, I recognize that also inherently makes them less useful for self-defense. Okay, so far we've talked about grappling and striking, and they both have some pros and some cons, but I'm sure there's something on the table that I haven't mentioned that I'm sure you're mad about. Weapons. The reality of self-defense is you should always be anticipating a weapon. So knowing how to use one and how to defend yourself from one is pretty important. So why don't we study something like Kali or Hema? These are good options, and depending on the kind of weapon you're training with, do reflect something that happens in the real world. But I don't think we're necessarily walking around carrying rattan sticks. And if you're the kind of guy who has 3, 4, 10 knives on you, you're probably the more dangerous person than anyone who wants to hurt you. And I don't mean that as a compliment. That being said, because most of the time you're training to deal with someone who has a weapon that could potentially kill you, you're not taught to stand there and take the strike, and instead you're taught to avoid the strike. In a fight, and I'm talking about in a ring or in a cage, you have the benefit of rounds, where you and your opponent could spend minutes on end feeling each other out before anyone commits to a full power strike. That's not always the case, but it's sometimes the case, which is not always the case in self-defense. Whereas, in self-defense, if someone's trying to hit you, they have bad intentions from the start. If someone's trying to choke you out, they're trying to do it from the start. So learning to put yourself in a position where you're avoiding their weapon, whether it be a knife, a stick, or even their hand, is a lot more useful than standing in front of them and trading. But I also think weapon styles depend greatly on what you're studying and who's teaching you. Because again, if your teacher is telling you to walk around carrying 10 knives and you're prepared to defang the snake on everyone who comes around you, they're not really training you for the real world. But I do see the weapons-based movement moving more towards practical real-world self-defense, and so I think it's a good thing to have in your back pocket, while also recognizing that a lot of those people are cross-training in grappling and striking arts. Bottom line is, self-defense is really more of a mindset and a collection of soft skills that you're not going to learn in the martial arts. But there is something the martial arts can offer you, regardless of what style we're talking about, that actually accurately prepares you for self-defense. You want to know what it is? Do you really? Really? Make sure you subscribe and I'll tell you. Because just like self-defense is a collection of soft skills, the real self-defense benefits of martial arts are all soft benefits. You go to a gym 2 to 3 times a week, train for an hour, this is what you're going to get. Fitness, confidence, community, and discipline. All of these things result in good self-defense. If you look strong and fit, you look hard to kill. People don't want to attack someone that doesn't look like a victim. Confidence. If you know you have the ability to throw someone to the ground and choke them unconscious, but you choose not to, it's going to change the way you interact with people. You're not going to be afraid of the person who jumps out of you in the shadows because you know there's not a real likelihood they can hurt you. And you're not going to be afraid to speak up for yourself because you constantly have to speak up for yourself physically in the gym. Community. And this one is very important. Every hour you're spending in the gym is an hour you're not spending somewhere you shouldn't be. And while you're there, you're making a community of like-minded friends who ideally operate under some code of conduct that makes them safe and fun for you to be around. Discipline. And I'm not just talking about saying, "Oh, sensei," until you get your black belt. I'm talking about learning how to keep a calm, cool, collected head and push through adversity. Again, going back to what we said about confidence, knowing that you have the ability to hurt someone, but keeping your mouth shut and learning when to walk away or when to stand up for yourself, that's discipline. And that's something you learn through martial arts. So what's the best martial art for self-defense? It's the one that keeps you training. It's the one that makes you come in day after day, the one that you like the best, the one that has the best people. If you're doing that diligently and learning to put its principles into real practice, and your teacher's not an asshole, well then it's a great martial art for self-defense. All your punches, kicks, and techniques, those are just tools in the toolbox. It's important that you train in a martial art that teaches you how to use your tools, but that's more about getting your money's worth than about anything to do with self-defense. But if we're being real honest, I think a low kick for self-defense, peak move. If you enjoyed the video, it would go a long way if you subscribe, turn notifications on, drop a comment down below, and share the video with a friend. All that being said, I want to thank you guys for the hard work. Thank you for the hard work yet to be done, and I'll see you next time.